Is DEI dead? With the political battle and backlash around DEI raging in the US and beyond, today's episode is timely and important. We're diving headfirst into the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion with a guest who's shaping the conversation in unique and powerful ways. Meet Marcie Hawranik, founder and CEO of Canadian Equality Consulting, whose pioneering work has been recognized everywhere from the United Nations to Canada's House of Commons. She's here to shed light on the challenges, the opportunities, and what's next for DEI. So buckle up for a fascinating and forward-looking discussion that will change how you think about building inclusive workplaces. Welcome to the Working Well podcast, a show that explores the critical intersection of leadership, business strategy, and sustainable human performance. I'm your host, Tim Borys. Marcie, great to have you on the show today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and this is a very timely topic we're going to dive into, DEI, inclusion. Before we get there, I want to just get a bit of background on, tell me a bit of how you got to where you are. You've won some awards, and you're a very respected and esteemed person in this industry. And tell me what brought you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm Marcie. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm also based out west in Calgary. And I'm founder and president of Canadian Equality Consulting. And we're a company, a social enterprise that's on a mission to build really the best workplaces for everyone. And a lot of this work has been informed by my background. So I'm originally from Manitoba, or Treaty 1 territory. And my background is in the human rights field. So, and I have a master's degree in conflict resolution. So I focus a lot on conflict resolution frameworks with a human rights lens. And I worked internationally for a while for a variety of different international nonprofits like Human Rights Watch. And then later the UN Human Rights Council, and then went into government for a long time when I moved back to Canada. But I was really proud about 7 years ago to start Canadian Equality Consulting, and we're remote across Canada. And we really help any sort of workplace create inclusive, thriving, high-performing workplace cultures.
Fantastic. And it is extremely important work, and again, very timely in the news these days. And that's one of the reasons we're talking is there's been a lot of, well, over the past 10 years particularly, ramped up significantly from where things have been going. You've been in this industry a long time. But for a lot of people, this is a very new topic. And can you tell me, I guess, why do you believe DEI has become so polarizing at this point in time?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It definitely has been, it feels like it's new to a lot of folks, but it's really been around for well over sort of 60 years and a variety of different terms and jargon and language. It kind of started around the 1960s, around the US Civil Rights Movement, and then 1977, kind of the Canadian Human Rights Act. But it started out with a very strong human rights lens, and it evolved over time and changed. But the terminology of DEI is relatively new, but it's really just kind of the jargon itself. And yeah, and it's become polarized. It's become politicized. Kind of started in the US with a lot of false narratives around diversity, equity, and inclusion and what that actually means. There were a lot of approaches that weren't necessarily the most effective approaches from a variety of different folks operating in the DEI space, which left folks feeling upset about it or sour, and kind of fed into the existing myths that already existed about it. And that kind of then just caught traction and caught momentum, became politicized, became a wedge issue in the political debates in the US. And we're seeing that kind of merge into Canada at a slower pace and hopefully in a less extreme way.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. It is coming into Canada, but not quite as dramatically, as aggressively as you would see in south of the border. You'd mentioned that when I almost think of it as a pendulum. The pendulum really seemed to swing quite rapidly in one direction. And you mentioned some of the things that were maybe incorporated incorrectly, or the narrative was shifted slightly. What are some of those things that you saw?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the things that almost fed into some of the false narratives or myths around DEI were some ineffective practices, a lot of kind of shaming and blaming strategies and training sessions, for instance, that kind of isolated folks and made them feel excluded. And not part of it when DEI is really about everyone and every and all of societies and all of a workplace's diversity. Not one identity is less valid than any other. So there were kind of different techniques like that that were commonly used. And then also a lot of folks that didn't have messaging to combat the false narratives either. So that was really tricky because we're DEI practitioners, we're not communications experts also. So it's hard to navigate that. There was a lot of one-off trainings that that workplaces asked for and folks delivered on. That we know that one-off trainings aren't very effective and that they work up until maybe a month after, and then after that you start regressing, and you have to keep the momentum up and keep building and stacking your learning.
And that
But it's
goes
also interesting.
that
Yeah.
goes to any learning, right? And we see
Yeah.
that in learning and development field in general. There's so many one-offs.
Yeah.
With your and you said something about the one-off trainings, but the also the
Mhm.
I guess at that time, particularly over the past 5 to 7 years, it seems like everyone was just a DEI expert coming in, and you get these trainings going on. Talk about some of the negatives that maybe created fuel or the flames for this backlash that we're feeling right now.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because I like to also frame this in a context that every movement that pushes for social progress, there's a wave of resistance to it that follows. And there's always a wave of backlash. So this is another moment of time of that for sure. And when we look at, but it's a really great opportunity for us to look at, like you said, what's not working. And some of the things that weren't working were, some of them were systemic, some of them were individual. For instance, that sort of blaming and shaming techniques. A lot of the momentum around DEI really kind of hit the ground in COVID-19 during the pandemic and around the murder of George Floyd and around the finding of residential school graves in Canada of children. So a lot of that kind of pushed the momentum for greater social progress and greater demand for DEI. But like you said, that expanded the industry or the sector, this practice so rapidly that so many people were entering this space. And there is no like regulatory body of DEI practitioners or professionals by any means. So folks were entering it with their lived experience and a lot of workplace trauma, right? Coming in and ended up kind of burning out, experiencing the worst sort of backlash, right? And harming themselves, right? So there's a lot of blaming and shaming tactics that were used by folks that didn't have the experience to navigate a lot of the questions and the backlash that they'd received. And then also other things that weren't working was as the industry expanded and everyone became sort of DEI experts too, and more people entered this space, every company or all of these workplaces now were like, okay, we don't have enough money or budget necessarily to have a DEI team. So we're just going to task someone in HR to do it and hope for the best, right? That maybe doesn't understand it or have a full background in it. Or then they'll say, let's get a bunch of people with lived experience on a DEI committee that's volunteer based, that's off the side of their desk, which again, if you don't have training, it's a lot of pressure and a lot of harm can come from that too, if you're relying on lived experience, because a lot of that is trauma in the workplace.
And I love how you mentioned that. Yeah, in the lived experience. And I always think of it as there's a lot of emotion behind this. And it can be good, it can be passion, excitement, enthusiasm for creating that change. But the trauma aspect is also very real and a major factor in, I guess, how people are showing up. And when that voice is finally given, it doesn't always come out as effectively as it could to move the needle on the change that's wanting to be created. I see you mentioned that that's some of why we're facing this situation right now. And if we'll talk about the future in a second, but if we think about the past 60 years or so you've mentioned, or 70 years of DEI efforts, what are some of the things we've learned about the resistance to this change, and where we are in the change curve for DEI right now?
Yeah. So, um, as you mentioned, the DEI industry has been around for well over 60 years, and it's not been a linear movement by any means. And after any sort of social progress momentum, there's always been a milestone, there's a kind of a wave of backlash. Um, so it never has been linear, and we can remember this from affirmative action or employment equity. We saw this also more recently with Black Lives Matter. After the murder of George Floyd, we all received tremendous momentum for racial equity initiatives, which was incredible. And then shortly after, there was backlash related to, all lives matter, and those sorts of pieces started popping up. So it's not something new, because progressive movements always challenge the status quo and challenge organizational and broader societal culture and norms, and sometimes even our institutions, right? And a lot of the assumptions or predications that they're built upon. So it always is a little rocky, but ways that what have we learned from this so that we can keep doing better and generating broader buy in? I think we're at a point in time where there is still so much value in DEI work, because the accomplishments that the DEI industry has created are deeply valued, like hybrid workplace environments, parental leave, bereavement leave, right? Pay equity, more structured hiring processes to make it more fair, more accessible digital spaces, and folks with disabilities having their needs met in a greater way, and looking at neurodiversity, right? So there's so much that society values that has come from DEI. It's just really easy to take that for granted. And we also know that the outcomes of this work are incredible. It used to be called the business case for DEI, but now we call it, these are DEI outcomes. These are the outcomes of the work, right? And the number one driver of the Great Resignation was toxic workplace cultures. And not to mention that our country is rapidly diversifying. So, with high rates of immigration, right? So, this is going to remain a key driver of any sort of organizational success, is to have DEI type initiatives or lenses in place in their decision making and their policies and their workplace practices. So it's gonna have to remain relevant. It just probably won't be called DEI. I've seen a lot of organizations lump it, bring it back within HR. I've seen folks put it in like a VP role type position, but call it inclusion or call it belonging, something that is more palatable. Because what's interesting is a lot of the backlash has to do with the jargon and the acronym DEI. And there was a study that showed that 70% of Americans, when they were given a definition of what DEI actually means, they supported it.
So it needs rebranding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's always been rebranded at different times, right? So
yeah. When you get down to it, it's about respecting, including humans in the process, and that hasn't changed. But yeah, what it's been called is very different over the years. And we hear a lot these days of, and this probably goes to the rebranding, but is DEI dead? Like,
yeah.
what do you say to that?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. I don't think so. I don't think it's dead for all those reasons, right? Like it's deeply valued when folks know what it is. The term DEI, I think, is dying. I think I don't know if it'll ever be fully dead. In the US, it probably is, but in Canada, it's definitely a trigger point. So DEI, the work itself, is not dead. It's not even close to being dead. But the language used, that acronym on its own, is definitely dying.
Yeah. The
Or
concept is alive
evolving.
and well.
Yeah.
Concept is alive and well. The terms we use to describe it are going to change over time and
Yeah.
evolve as the situation and our mindset around it changes as well. That was something you brought up, is that it really involves leadership at shifting mindset to what it is we're doing and trying to accomplish. And as you said, when you describe the true meaning of DEI to people, 70% of people support it.
Hmm.
How do we start to shift that mindset, particularly at the senior levels of organizations?
Hmm. Yeah. And that can be really hard to do. I would say I always advocate with my background in kind of conflict systems design in multi-pronged approaches and looking at it with a systems lens. So one part, looking at the systems, how do they operate? How do they prop leaders up to legitimize these views or not? What are the values of the organization, as an example, right? So looking at it from that lens on one hand. And then on the other hand, I still feel like the best way to have conversations on this topic and to um, depoliticize folks and to meet them where they're at effectively, especially leaders, is through one on one conversations, not necessarily through a group training either. So, kind of coaching conversations or one on one. And it's really interesting because I've been doing some more research on this just within the past couple months too. And there's been some, and I always in the past relied on sharing facts. Like you can't argue with facts and research, right? Like here's all the reasons why you should care and do this work. But now we're finding facts-based campaigns actually can increase misperceptions. And if it's already a polarized topic, folks tend to double down on it if they feel like your view or the facts that are being shared threaten their own worldview or identity. So the more effective approach is through that one-on-one conversations, storytelling as opposed to sharing facts, really creating a connection with them at first that's based on empathy and trust and genuine curiosity. So looking at them as a human, right? And talking to them, understanding what's important to them, and then sharing the stories and the experiences. And then you move along together, right? Because people aren't expendable. I don't think there's any person that we can't bring along on this journey with us. So I always have kind of tremendous hope that that's always a possibility. We can bring people along. We just need to figure out where they're at and not shame them for not knowing or not understanding.
Yeah, I love that approach because it humanizes the process. And I like what you said about the statistics too, that cognitive dissonance can really rear up too when people are faced with facts that go against their worldview. It's the
Hmm.
bridging that gap is not always easy. Often the heels dig in, and people become even more entrenched in their existing beliefs and whatever that belief may be. And that happens on every part of the spectrum. But yeah, being able to have those one-on-one conversations is a
Hmm.
great way to call it bridge the gap, for lack of a better better term.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I where does psychological safety come into those one-on-one conversations and being able to create that environment where you can have those conversations?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great key aspect of framing the conversation, but also in it's foundational to successful DEI. No matter what you call it. Like psychological safety is so incredibly important for folks to actually feel safe to share their true views or their questions or their experiences, to challenge thoughts. So that's something that's really interesting when you're looking at it from approaching, because in DEI work and a lot of our work, we're looking at it how psychologically safe do employees feel and do leaders feel, do equity deserving populations feel, and then slicing the data a variety of different ways. But in terms of looking at it from, okay, how can we as like a third party consultant or let's say a lead of DEI in an organization ensure psychological safety for the leadership when we have these conversations with them? I think that's often overlooked due to the power differentials, but I think it's super important. And there's different ways to to navigate that when working with a leader, right? So sometimes in an organization, you build coalitions or build champions, and someone that's respected or really close with the leader may be the best person to have that conversation with them, or prepping them in advance. Never walk into this, never, we don't want to blindside anyone. So, so making sure that if you enter this kind of one-on-one conversation with a leader, they know what it's about. So they can feel comfortable and prepared for it as well. And then creating that rapport is really key when you first start it.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
you
I
won't get
still,
very far if you don't have psychological safety. That's for sure. Yeah.
yeah, and I guess the challenging part for people is where do you start if it doesn't exist in the first place? How do you start building it and create the environment as a leader? How do you, yeah, how do you start that process?
hmm Yeah. And it can be really hard. And sometimes it's about some strategies that I've seen work well is almost kind of modeling the way. So when speaking with folks, or if you're asking for feedback on certain things, again, always prep the conversation, but then be really open and genuine, be vulnerable, share your vulnerabilities as well to show that, you trust them to do that, and see if they'll be comfortable enough to reciprocate that as well. Yeah, and you can even have ground rules for the conversation or some guiding principles before you go in if you know it's going to be difficult. But yeah, it's a very important part to make sure that it needs to exist for folks to ask, to feel comfortable to ask questions, right? And not be shamed in the process.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. And talk to me a bit about situations where
Mhm.
you've seen leaders who've come in with a resistant mindset and really had a change of heart or a shift in their mindset to
Mhm.
really embrace this process and seen some great results.
Mhm. Yeah, great question. I would say typically when we start a variety of different projects, like with a company, anything DEI related, when we do assessments. So, what that process looks like is we often start, the leaders are the first we engage, to explain what it is, what it's not, give them some key messages, let them ask any question they want, and to help them, equip them to be champions of this work in this process. And at the start of a project, usually they're all pretty on board and they're pretty optimistic. There may be some fears that percolate and some myth busting questions or discussions, but other than that, it's pretty positive. The point of resistance that we've seen for most leaders is happens when we get the data and then we share the data with them. And so we've done the surveys, we've gathered lived experience either through focus groups or one on one conversations or a combination of the two. And then we create a story and we look at the themes, and we create a really detailed sort of intersectional analysis and story of where things are at in your organization, how the employees feel, and also how the leaders feel, and where there's disparities or gaps, right? And that's the most, I think, commonplace where leaders then kind of have a shock on, okay, how can this happen? Because I don't see it. I'm not experiencing that. So therefore, it can't exist. So there's a little bit of that. There's also a little bit of personal defensiveness of, okay, I'm overseeing this organization. I thought it was great. And they feel personally hurt by it because their position is so personal to them and part of their identity, right? And they want to do a good job for folks and they see folks struggling and it's really shocking. So there's a lot of different kind of types of resistance that pop up at that point. And the way that we've been able to move folks past that is when we share that information, we frame the conversation around, okay, look, don't take things personally. There are always things that come out in an assessment. No organization is perfect. So we frame a bit about that context. And then we also say, and we're here to help you, and we want your organization to succeed, and we know you want your organization to succeed. And then we have that conversation, and they often kind of question or try to rationalize or downplay certain results at different times. And what's worked to shift past that and to break down those walls, I find, is when we share the stories. around it. And that brings out a lot of emotion, a bit more vulnerability, broader context, deeper understanding. And also, what we get from a lot of our focus groups is ideas on how to improve. And a lot of it's really low hanging fruit or easy fixes, right? In addition to some of the bigger things. So then, because sometimes this can feel completely overwhelming to a leader, but having that as well in tandem to the results also really helps.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think, well, and that process sounds amazing when you can go in and get the data and do focus groups and individual stories.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier one-off trainings. I'm sure
Yeah.
you get a lot of calls about, hey, can you come in and do a seminar or a workshop?
Mhm.
What's your typical response to companies that are asking for that?
hmm That's a tricky one because that's the majority of folks that come to us, right? Or come to consultants is they all, and that's how often budgets work. They get like an annual and one-time budget and they're not sure about what they get next year. So it ends up being one-off, right? So even if they have the best of intentions, the way the budget cycle is designed sometimes prohibits that effectiveness, but we still do small scale training projects, but we measure them all. And we always have next steps for folks that's based on data. So, for instance, if someone wanted unconscious bias and inclusive hiring type training, we do kind of a quick pre training survey and then a post one to measure the effectiveness, the satisfaction, and the impact of it. And then also where there's still questions and need, because then that helps them when we give them the report with recommended next steps and all that data, that helps them build the case to do more and make sure it's not one off. And that we've had a lot of success with that. A lot of folks then want to do the next steps and keep stacking it and building it. But that's something we always start early in like any project, even in our early exploratory calls when they first come to us and ask for it, we're like, look, these aren't the most effective, right? These are the risks you're taking by doing this too. Um, and this is how we can mitigate that by working together with these different pieces in there. And then usually it works out well. But yeah, and we also started adding, which is often might be helpful, is we always tack on 3 months of coaching after a training. That's complementary. So like, let's keep the momentum going. Let's keep it building so that you, after 1 month, you don't regress.
Love it. Yeah. And that's partly selfish to ask that question because I'm like, I want to see how it
Okay.
matches up to what I'm doing in my consulting. So
Yeah, but it's
it
hard. It's the majority of what people want, you know?
absolutely, yeah, and it's about that education and asking, well, what do you hope to accomplish from this training? Like, what's your ideal outcome?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and really mapping out what can be expected and what it would take to accomplish those outcomes.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's always interesting to hear
It's
what
pretty
leaders are
neat. Yeah.
are
But
thinking.
it's cool too, because I don't also want to underestimate the value of like an amazing training, right? And I'm sure you know
Absolutely.
this too, right? Like you're in a training, you're facilitating a session, you can see the shift in people's minds, right? And it's the most like it gives you instant gratification, whereas an assessment is like 6 month process. But this, there still is such powerful impact if you can just help them sustain it. That's, I guess, the key, but it's still
Yeah,
quite powerful.
you labeled it perfectly. The sustainment is you create these events, create a one-off like turbo boost in terms of behavior change and mindset shift, and but it falls off a cliff within a few weeks or a month.
Yeah.
The behavioral changes that we want to see sustained. So, what are the little touch points in between that are giving that little boost of continued change? And then ideally you follow up at a certain point with another boost event which keeps them that behavior change
hmm
process going and accelerates it.
hmm Yeah. Exactly. And if you can, like a lot of folks are doing now, is they're roping DEI kind of into HR portfolios, which has its benefits, but also has its risks. But that is where a lot of employee data is housed. That's where you can access the policies and the systems, right? So there is power to doing that. And if you can then embed it in all those pieces, you can sustain it too throughout the whole company.
There's a love-hate relationship with HR in terms of effectiveness. I'm going to just throw it out there,
Yeah.
and I'm going to get some
Yeah.
hate mail on from
Yeah.
the HR side, but HR is amazing,
Yeah.
and they're so passionate about what they do, but there's
Mhm.
still a gap in terms of how executive leadership sees HR and what their role is in the organization, and where the change efforts actually happen. And HR can be such a great foundation for that, but if it's not being transferred to day-to-day actions and mindset shift of senior
Yeah,
leadership,
very
it's
true.
doomed to fail. And HR has felt that for so long. They've been trying to run with all these great programs and initiatives for so long, and it doesn't get transferred
Mhm.
to sustainable
Mhm.
behavior change and in how leaders show up. And when we talk about DEI
Mhm.
and well-being and thriving at work, that you can have all the programs, but if you're, put it bluntly, your boss is an asshole, it
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter,
Mhm.
because that's the end experience that the employee feels. So how are we shifting how leaders show up each day,
Mhm.
what they're thinking, how those thoughts turn into the perceptions of the situation? Are we holding the mirror up for leaders on a consistent basis to have them see, hey, I didn't even realize this action was creating this impact for my team or the organization? And that is extremely powerful. And my perception is that I'm not seeing that happen as often as it could,
Mhm.
based on all the information that we have out there.
Mhm.
What do
Yeah.
you see as the solution?
Mhm. That's hard. Um,
There you
def
go. Just solve it in the next 30 seconds. Go.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's very complex, but you can't a DEI program can fail if you don't have leaders bought in or being coached to kind of champion it or to demonstrate, show their commitment and to actually, demonstrate that they understand what it is and what it actually means um, through their own behaviors. Um, yeah. So then I just fall back to my multi-pronged approach with my conflict resolution background, right? You have to tackle all the different layers in people leaders, the middle management. That's where things often get stuck too. Is sometimes you can get the senior leaders on board, but what tends to motivate the middle management a lot is because they're stuck right in the middle, and they have arguably one of the hardest jobs, right? And they want
Agreed.
to, and often what I find the messaging that works well with them is how can we make their life easier by being like, okay, you have all this pressure from above, all this pressure from below. This is how DEI can streamline or make things easier or make things, less complicated to manage folks or manage concerns, use these frameworks, use these tools, that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, it has to be a combo and it has to be data driven. So it's customized to that organization. Otherwise it won't stick or it'll be ineffective as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the data. And so, what is the data you usually call up to, I guess, bridge the gap from the story to the tangible takeaways that are going to satisfy the CFO?
Yeah. Yeah. I find when you do these sort of organizational assessments and you gather the data, and you present the story and the picture, and then you support leaders to share it with everyone too, and to not feel that personal defensiveness or ownership over all the problems, right? Share it with folks. Then the next step is to really, in a collaborative process, like co create what to do now. Because as a third party, I can look at research, I can look at best practices and say you should do X, Y, and Z and it'll make you effective this way. But I'm not the expert on the organization or the work that they do. So it's more important for them to have a greater participation at that phase too, to be able to know what works with their budget, right? Make it practical, line it in your strat plan. Um, Before, a lot of it was a separate DEI strategy and action plan, which sometimes may still need to be the case, but most of the time now it's like, no, just put it in your strat plan, make it your corporate priorities, right? And let's embed it in there and make it more effective then and show that it truly is everyone's responsibility, and give everyone that accountability from that. So that's how I would kind of, we have to take it out of that academic realm where it's like I'm the external expert and I know best, listen to me, right? And let them be really a key part of that process and make it actually, tangible and implementable. It's not a word, but implementable for them.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that, putting it into the bigger picture strategy, and that takes some vulnerability from the CEO
Yeah.
to really say, yeah, hey, this is something we need to work on, and we're committed to working on it.
Yeah.
How have you seen that type of? Now you said that's great at the executive level. How do we transfer that down to the tangible
Mhm.
actions that leaders take throughout the organization?
Mhm. And so there's a couple ways that I've seen it work well. And like you said, it all starts with kind of that executive level, owning it and communicating it and sharing it and showing the buy in. And the power of that is tremendous. So when you have a leader share these results at like a town hall, let's say, um, and even share a bit about, this is how these results affected me when I first read them. I was shocked, and I'm kind of horrified I didn't know about this, right? But now we're going to do better together. That when there's that a little bit of vulnerability attached to sharing it, like the power behind that, is massive. Like, wow, does that ever boost participation in the strategy design phase, or sharing exciting ideas from folks, and some ways that you can kind of embed this into, let's say, systemic practices, and so that it's everyone's responsibility and filter it down in the organization, is again sort of like embedding it in all the different processes and policies of an employee's life cycle, but particularly, a lot of organizations have a value that is either explicitly inclusion or equity or diversity, or a similar one that you can lump it in to. And a lot of folks do their performance management processes. A key aspect of that is evaluating folks according to the values of a company. So that's a really kind of a streamlined, easy way that you can keep track of, and monitor, or evaluate folks based on their work in this space, and if they're held accountable to it, and they're seen, and your raise, your promotion, whatnot is tied to your performance reviews, then you're going to do it.
Like that, yeah. And what popped into my mind as you were saying that is, how do we avoid the, I guess, the downside of this
Hmm.
systemization or integration of the programs across an organization, so they don't become administrivia and just
Hmm.
like forced upon people, as like, you got to do this at the start of every meeting, we have to
Yeah.
recognize this, and people are like, oh, we gotta go through that again. And so how do you
Hmm.
balance that genuine change and operationalizing that change without
Hmm.
making it
Punitive.
something seen punitive? Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect word.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you definitely don't. Yeah. That can backfire things and fuel backlash and resentment in folks. So, just as important as like the system interventions and the policy interventions is that attention to the culture of the organization, right? And the types of behaviors that are expected and rewarded or incentivized. But a lot of it, I feel like, comes back to, um, it's so important for everyone to see a place for them in DEI work because it includes everyone, right? Everyone has intersectional identities that, and everyone has different lived experiences, and like huge gaps in how they experience the workplace or how they experience even different communication styles or conflict styles. So bringing it back to that and making everyone feel like this is not exclusionary. You're part of this and you're valid too, and your ideas matter and your experiences are valid and matter too, um, has to be incorporated.
Yeah, and I think that was a big part of the backlash we're seeing now, particularly from, I'll just say it, as
Hmm.
the older white males that are like, wait
Hmm.
a minute, what, we're not relevant anymore? And
Yeah.
like
They felt pushed
everything's,
out.
yeah,
Yeah.
everything shifted. And then, and the, what you had mentioned about the, as that voice was provided to groups that were not included in the past, some of that trauma was coming forward, and there was a lot of
Hmm.
negativity around how
Hmm.
like this how it was being conveyed, and that was, I think, pushing that divide even more rather than welcoming the conversation and saying, "Hey, let," as you said, let's include everyone in that conversation.
Hmm.
There was a lot of one way conversation, which, to be fair, it had been one way conversation the other way for a long time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we expect that pendulum to swing a little bit,
Yeah.
but I think the white male group was not used to having that shift, and there was a
Yeah.
lot of, yeah, a lot of factors involved in why we're seeing what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, totally. And there was definitely the sentiments of feeling excluded and always being centered before, combined with a lot of fear from a lot of there were some like illegal practices in the US in the DEI movement for sure, right? Where some folks would come in and say, the executive team is white, you're all fired, like, or you have to go now, and we're replacing you, right? This sort of thing. So it was, and that's then that fueled so much fear and spread. And it's like, no, that was rare. It was very rare, first of all, if that ever happened. And that wasn't doing DEI right. That's not how you should do it. That's not how it ever was intended to be done. But also, even when we look at the anti DEI executive orders that President Trump has put in, the language around that, a lot of that stemmed from what they called illegal DEI, and a lot of those were those scenarios that just kind of went out of control in public discourse and in narratives. But yeah, everyone's feelings are valid, and um, DEI isn't a zero sum game, right? It's expanding the pie and it's making it more equitable and more fair for everyone, and we see that through all the outcomes of it.
And I think some of where we're looking at right now as well is the when there was so much more, especially at the start of the pandemic, so much more focus on that, and lots of
Yeah.
money and resources and programs. Basically, everything got thrown at the wall. And we're at the point now where it's like, let's see what stuck and let's look at it through a hard lens of data and change and what's working, what's not. And so it seems natural that some programs that were just not working get
Hmm.
rolled back or taken away. And hopefully, my hope is that
Hmm.
that investment gets put into new areas that are going to create more positive change, and we'll keep looking at the data and assessing and iterating the process so that we're continuing to improve rather than what's happening in some places is that we're just legislating that this can't happen, which
Yeah.
I think is, taking 40, 50 steps back.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah. We can improve and evolve as an industry without taking significant, 40 years away or 60 years away of social progress. And I'm hopeful that that's what we're going to be doing in Canada, and that will be different than what we're seeing in the US. Because there's great power in letting go of things that no longer work, and ultimately, driving change in a more sustainable, meaningful, and effective way.
Mhm. So if we zoom out to the bigger picture with all the political landscape going on, the changes you've seen over the past few years, what do you say is next for DEI or whatever we calling it in the move forward moving
Yeah.
future?
Whatever we call it, I think it's going to stay. It's going to stay. It's not going anywhere. I think over time it will increase in relevance and demand and need. I don't think it's going to be called DEI, but this work, it's so it's so valued because what it's produced for work, for modernizing workplaces, for workplace protections, um, for workplace flexibility, all of those important aspects of it, people deeply value. Um, and with a diversifying workforce, with folks staying in the workforce longer, and younger generations joining, and our high rates of immigration, it's going to be so needed. And that conflict resolution around it is needed, to keep workplaces working effectively. And ultimately, often what it comes down to is no one likes toxic workplaces. No one wants to spend the majority of their time at work, with a shitty boss or colleagues that make their days miserable, right? So organizations will always be incentivized to do better for at a bare minimum that reason.
Yeah, and that's a key reason why I got into this field in the first place is I started from the fitness health side, and all my clients were like, it was the wellness aspect, and all my clients were corporate executives that were stressed and burnt out. And as I
Mm.
got into the workplace, I realized that, wow, pretty quickly early on, that the workplace was the major factor in why they were feeling that way.
Oh no.
and and mindset, and I started looking at organizational culture, and DEI and belonging and inclusion is a huge part of it. And if you are not, like, you can have all those pieces in place in the wellness field. We say you can check all the boxes of wellness but still not have well-being. And
Oh,
it's like,
I
and
like
so
that. Yeah.
shifting the mindset of wellness are the tactics that you use to create well-being. And if well-being isn't happening, you have to look at the tactics. And right now, I see the gap in that is leadership, because leaders have been saying, "Oh, we need a corporate gym, we need the yoga programs, we need this, we need a DEI program," and they're checking all these boxes. But the data is showing that people aren't well,
Yeah.
and they're stressed, and burnout's high, and they don't feel included, and they're disengaged, and all
Mhm.
these things. So it's like we've been investing all this money, but not creating the outcome we want. And I've sat down with executive leaders, and they said, "Oh, that's like all that stuff is just stuff. We're about quarterly results, and we need this bottom line." And I'm like, "That's fine. If you want to believe that, that's great.
Mhm.
Do it for selfish reasons for your bottom line, because whether you believe in that or not, it
Mhm.
creates an impact on your bottom line. It's costing you money every single day. So believe what you want to believe, but
Mhm.
believe the financial statements, because when you invest, you might be making money now. You'll make a ton more money if you treat your people well, and there's turnover is lower, and all these things that we know
Yeah.
work. And so do it for shareholders. You have a fiduciary
Mhm.
duty to your shareholders to produce the best returns you can. And
Mhm.
that involves treating your people well, making sure they're feeling
Mhm.
like they belong, and they're included, and they're happy and healthy and well. And that
Mhm.
is something that is, we're not there yet.
Yeah, yeah. And wow, the parallels between that and the DEI space in terms of folks that just do, let's say, celebrating commemorative dates
Yeah.
is like spot on. Like a lot of companies are like, oh, well, we're doing it, right? We have a pizza lunch every Friday, or we celebrate Black History Month, or but with a one-off speaker, um, that talks for an hour and then leaves, and no one ever talks about it again, right? Things like that. Um, so there's incredible power of, using your budgets better. Don't pay for all this stuff that doesn't give you results, right? And look at what your people are telling you and believe them.
I used to laugh because I used to do a whole bunch of lunch and learn sessions and
Yeah.
corporate talks and things. And I, back when I was doing fitness and nutrition ones, I'd go in and I'd do a 1 hour lunch and learn on nutrition. And
Oh.
at the back of the room, there'd be boxes of Domino's pizza. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Like,
Oh, yeah.
it just shone a spotlight on how
Yeah.
broken the system was, because some HR admin was like,
Oh,
oh, a seminar, we need to order food. Okay, well, pizza. And they don't look at what's going on, and it's a one-off thing. And I'd always say to
gosh.
people, like, so what are you hoping to get from this?
Yeah. Well, that's
And
painful. Yeah.
yeah, but that happens in the wellness side. And you mentioned the parallels with DEI.
Mhm.
It's DEI is a huge factor in well-being, and
Mhm.
it's just part of the bigger picture puzzle. And yeah, so well,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
is your hope for the future, and I guess the one takeaway you'd have for leaders that really are wanting to create change, but maybe in an organization that has a bit of resistance to it?
Mhm. I feel like right now, a message that I think might be important to keep top of mind or try to remember, given the state of the world and everything happening right now, the state that we're in, is change is natural and still possible, right? It's so easy to be discouraged by seeing everything happening in the US. If you're a champion of this work or you practice it, whether you're in a formal position or not, it's discouraging seeing everything happening and it can be really overwhelming. But despite that heaviness, um, it does work and people deeply value it when they know what it is, right? So sharing those stories, sharing those examples, don't ever underestimate the impact of those one-on-one conversations, and lead with that. And then as you build champions, you can scale it because one-on-one sounds, you can't talk to every single person, but you can scale it, right? When you create champions. So it's possible. There is hope. When you look at what this work really truly is, it is deeply valued by society and by our workforce and our population. So don't lose sight of that because it's easy to.
Yeah, yeah. I was saying to someone the other day, I've yet to meet in my entire life a person who felt valued, was doing work they enjoyed, and they thought was making an impact on the world.
Wow.
I've yet to meet someone who had those things and didn't love their job, or
Yeah.
wasn't happy and well. Like,
Mhm. Yeah. Valued. Yeah. Awesome. I love those three. Yeah. And DEI will
yeah,
get you there.
yeah.
Yeah.
When you think back to even Gallup's Q12, a lot of the questions is, do you feel valued, and do you feel your work contributes to something bigger than you in the role, and
Mhm.
do you feel your opinions are respected? It all it's all in
Yes.
there.
Mhm.
And yeah, but a lot of times that just gets um, turned into administrative thing that leaders do once a year, and they do their report, and it's like the
Mhm.
360 review or their annual review.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, here the data, and it goes in a desk drawer somewhere or some folder on their computer that never gets looked at again. And,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thankfully we have people like you and organizations like yours out there that are helping
Yeah. Yours
companies
too. Yeah.
create this change. Yes.
Yeah. We'll get
Well,
there. Yeah.
yes. Well, thank you so much, Marcie. It's been an amazing to hear your insight and your wisdom. And where can people find you?
Yeah. You can find me probably the easiest on LinkedIn, or our website, canadianequality.ca.
Okay. I'll make sure I put those in the show notes so everyone has them there. And I look forward to the next conversation. And if there's ever a way I can help with what you're doing, please reach out.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was fun.
That wraps up another episode of the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, which guests or topics would you like to see featured on the show? Message me through LinkedIn or on the contact page of timborys.com with your ideas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Borys with Fresh Wellness Group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.